The city lights glimmered like distant stars against the glass walls of Daniel Gray's penthouse. Inside, everything was spotless, silent and cold, just as he liked it. Or so he told himself. The only sound was the faint ticking of an expensive clock and the hum of his laptop. Numbers filled the screen, profits, projections, endless spreadsheets. His company was thriving, his reputation flawless. Yet somehow his chest felt unbearably heavy, as if success had drained the color from his life. He leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his temples. His reflection in the window stared back, sharp suit, tired eyes, no smile. Somewhere along the line, he'd stopped being Daniel and become Mr. Gray, the man who never slept, never laughed, never stopped working. The faint aroma of vanilla and baked sugar drifted from the kitchen, breaking the monotony. Mrs. Clara, his nanny, though she hadn't been paid to nanny him for years, had been in earlier, as she always was. She'd cooked breakfast, straightened the living room, and left before he came down. He preferred it that way. It was easier to avoid conversations that felt too human. As he walked toward the dining table, something small and colorful caught his eye. Folded piece of paper resting beside his coffee cup. A card hand-decorated with childish drawings of balloons and hearts. His name was written across it in bright red ink, for Daniel. He frowned. No one called him Daniel anymore. Not his employees, not his board members, not even his friends, if he still had any. Curiosity tugged at him and he picked it up. The paper was slightly crooked, as if cut by hand. Inside, the message was written in Clara's familiar cursive. Uneven but full of care. Happy birthday to the little boy who grew up too fast. You're never too old to be loved. He stared at the words, frozen. It wasn't his birthday, not for another week. At least. But somehow that didn't matter. The simple message struck deeper than any congratulatory speech or business award ever had. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt something crack inside him, a faint ache that had been buried under years of ambition. He sank into a chair, the card trembling in his hand. The smell of muffins still lingered in the air, reminding him of mornings from decades ago when life was simpler, when Clara would hum while cooking and he'd run around the kitchen barefoot, giggling. Now all that was left was silence, and one small card reminding him of a love he'd long taken for granted. The next morning, sunlight spilled softly through the glass walls of the mansion, painting warm streaks across the marble floor. Daniel hadn't slept much. The card still lay on his desk, edges worn from the way he kept picking it up. Reading it again and again, the words, "You're never too old to be loved," echoed in his head all night. He walked down the long hallway toward the servants' quarters, a place he hadn't been in years. His footsteps sounded almost too loud against the polished floors. When he reached the small laundry room, he found her there, Clara, folding sheets with slow, careful movements. Her silver hair was tied in a bun, her hands trembling slightly from age and exhaustion. She didn't notice him at first. She was humming a quiet tune, the same lullaby she used to sing to him when he was a boy afraid of thunder. Something in him tightened. For a second he saw her not as his employee, but as the woman who had once carried him in her arms, fed him, loved him when no one else did. "Clara," he said softly. She startled, dropping a towel. When she turned, surprise flickered across her face. He never came down here. "Oh, Mr. Gray. Daniel," she corrected quickly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated, holding up the little card. "You made this for me?" Her eyes softened immediately. A small, shy smile touched her lips. "Of course I did. You used to love birthday surprises when you were small. I wasn't sure anyone still remembered." He looked down at the card again, his throat tight. "It's been a long time since anyone gave me one." Clara's voice trembled a little as she spoke. "You work so hard, dear. You never stop. You don't talk to anyone, not even to smile. I just wanted to remind you that you're still that little boy I once knew, the one who laughed at burnt pancakes and called me his second mother." Her words hit him harder than he expected. His carefully built walls, made of pride, control, and years of isolation, seemed to waver. He tried to say something, anything, but his voice cracked. I didn't realize you remembered all that." "How could I forget?" she said softly. "I may be old, Daniel, but I remember everything. Every scraped knee, every night you couldn't sleep. You were never just a job to me." Silence filled the small room, warm and heavy with memories. Daniel stepped closer, unsure what to do with the sudden weight in his chest. "Thank you," he finally whispered. though the words felt too small for what he wanted to say. Clara smiled gently, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "You don't need to thank me, dear. Just don't forget who you are. You've built an empire, but don't lose the boy inside it." He nodded slowly, unable to speak. As he turned to leave, he paused at the doorway and looked back at her. Frail, humble, yet somehow stronger than anyone he knew. For the first time in years, Daniel Gray realized how lonely his success had made him. Clara stood at her small apartment door, her hands trembling as she wiped them on her faded apron. She had been cleaning when the knock came, soft but firm. She opened it slowly, expecting a neighbor or perhaps the landlord. Instead, she froze. Standing there in the crisp morning light was Daniel Gray, dressed simply, no suit, no tie, just a quiet smile that looked unfamiliar on his face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He held a bouquet of daisies, her favorite, though she hadn't told anyone that in years. The breeze lifted the corner of her apron, and the scent of baking bread drifted between them. "Pack your things," he said at last, his voice calm but sure. "You're not working for me anymore." Her heart stuttered. The words hit her like a stone, and she instinctively stepped back. "Did I do something wrong, sir?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She tried to steady herself, but the thought of losing the one person she had left to care for made her chest ache. He shook his head gently. "No, Clara, you did everything right. Too right." Her brows furrowed in confusion. "Then why are you—" He stepped forward, cutting her off softly. "Because you're not just my employee. You're family, and family doesn't belong in servant quarters." The words came out rough, like he wasn't used to saying them. But they were true, every syllable soaked in emotion he'd kept buried for decades. Clara blinked rapidly as tears began to well in her eyes. Her lips trembled, and she pressed a hand against her heart. "Daniel," she whispered, voice breaking. "You can't mean that." "I do," he said quietly. "You raised me when no one else cared. You were there when I was sick, when I was lost, when I had nothing but anger and ambition. And I forgot what that meant. I forgot what you meant." He gestured to the car parked at the curb, where sunlight gleamed against the windshield. "You're coming home with me. No more lonely nights, no more quiet meals alone. You're family now, Clara, always have been." She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, tears rolled freely down her wrinkled cheeks. Daniel stepped closer and held out his hand. Slowly she reached out, her old, trembling fingers slipping into his firm grasp. The same hand she used to guide across the street when he was a little boy. As he led her outside, she noticed something inside the car. On the dashboard lay a small handmade card, a bit crooked and colorful, clearly drawn by Daniel himself. The sight made her heart squeeze. She picked it up carefully, and when she read it, her tears fell faster. "Happy birthday, Clara, from your son, Daniel." Her hand covered her mouth as a sob escaped. The handwriting was messy, uneven, and perfect. Daniel smiled, eyes glistening. "You made me cards every year. I thought it was my turn." She looked at him through blurred vision, laughter mixing with tears. "Oh, Daniel, you silly boy.